You know, it's strange. Here we are with our governments, especially in Canberra, Victoria, trying again and again to pass new laws to cut down our free speech, cut access to social media. And they're enemies of free speech, of freedom of information. At least in Afghanistan, one man, raised in Melbourne, is fighting the Taliban to let him keep free speech alive as best he can. And this man is Saad Mohseni, who went to Afghanistan after the Taliban was first driven out by the Americans. He founded a new radio station, TV as well later, called Moby, and that became the biggest independent media company in the country. I saw one of his journalists, his female journalists at work when I was last in Kabul. It was inspiring. But then, of course, America pulled out, the government crumbled, and the Taliban took over again. It seemed it was all over for Moby. You know, and now we're being told that Fatima Payman, that senator, can't possibly deal with the Taliban to get documents out there to prove she's not Afghan herself. But this Moby group has survived so far. And Saad Mohseni is now back in Australia to promote his memoirs, Radio Free Afghanistan. Saad Mohseni, it's great to see you again. How have you and your company survived under the Taliban?
Thank you, Andrew. I think we last spoke as Kabul was about to fall in late July of 2021. Listen, I mean, I thought that it would be the end of us, and that's why I started writing this book. But 3 years on, we're still there. Not as we were before, of course. But I don't know. I mean, I think I say we're there, but I always end it for now. It's a combination of things that's allowed us to survive to date.
Well, I must say, I'm surprised that you're still there too. The Taliban has already shut down one of your most popular programs, Afghan Star, which was a national singing competition. Singing's banned. Why did it do that, and what else have you been stopped from doing?
Well, I mean, we joke that, you know, they are the enemies of fun. So music, soap operas have been banned. But surprisingly, you know, cooking shows and travel shows and chat shows continue, comedy shows continue. Probably not as like before. Most important of all, our news operation continues. And while we've sacrificed some of the entertainment programs, we really have ramped up our education programs, which are very important increasingly because of the ban on girls' education in the country.
Oh, absolutely. When you say about the news programs, you can't report what's going on in the country?
Well, we pretty much report on everything. Probably with not as much fanfare as we did before the fall of Kabul, but you know, it's strange, but they do tolerate news stories, and we have to be careful, of course. And we're not 100% of what we were before. We're perhaps 90%. Nonetheless, I think that they believe they're of the people, for the people. So a degree of criticism is tolerated.
Now, you mentioned women there, you know, not being able to study for a start, which absolutely your TV programs would be invaluable there. When I last was in Kabul, I was astonished to see female journalists there. I'm pretty sure one was from your station, and face uncovered, by the way, too. What's the situation now? Are you still allowed to employ them?
Yeah, we employ a lot of women. As a matter of fact, close to a third of our employees are women. We actively recruit, train, and employ women. As a matter of fact, we had, I think, 8 women working for our news department in 2021. Today we have over 20 women. Now, they do have to cover their faces. They wear surgical masks to comply with the Taliban edict. Nonetheless, they can report on issues from the field. They can, they're in front of the camera, they're behind the camera. So they remain employed by us for now. You don't know what the situation will be like in a week's time, but for now we're continuing. And you know, the situation is always a lot more nuanced than it's how it's reported outside. You see women on the streets, they drive. As a matter of fact, in the major cities, they walk around, their faces uncovered. And they're even employed by the government. Most of the immigration officers at Kabul airport are female, for example. But you can't take any of this for granted.
This is so interesting because I think you once told me, there's the Taliban the first time, there was the Taliban then, and that's where its image really got seared into the world's consciousness. There's the return Taliban now, but it's got now a media to deal with satellite dishes and the whole thing. What's the difference now? What is the difference in the Taliban, for instance?
Well, the Taliban have evolved. The movement is made up of many young people who use WhatsApp and social media and TikTok and so forth. But the country has changed. The presence of the international community for 20 years was transformative for the country. You have to remember that half the country was not born in 2001. The population has doubled. And it is the youngest country outside of sub-Saharan Africa. And this transformed population is a very different one to the one that the Taliban ruled over in the 1990s.
And that's in large part, I think, from the information, a revolution in Afghanistan, and that's in partly due to you. So what hope does that give us? The Taliban's got this image of being fundamentalist, anti-women, obviously, anti-knowledge, anti. But given what you're saying, given the information flow into the country, what hope do we have that the Taliban can reform, that Afghanistan has a good future?
I think there's a path. It's a very narrow one, because while you have some pragmatic Taliban leaders, you also have some very hardcore leaders who do want to take us back to the 1990s. So we're not out of the woods yet. But in terms of the country, the genie's out of the bottle. It's hard to put back in. The people have changed over the last 2 decades, thanks to the presence of the international community and the billions of dollars that went into the country, in terms of educating people and so forth. So the hope is that international engagement with the country, perhaps with the Taliban leadership, perhaps with the more pragmatic ones, will create a path of sorts for the movement to reform from within.
And where can we get your book, Saad?
In all good bookshops, bookstores, and on Amazon, I'm sure.
Terrific. Saad Mohseni, I've always been inspired by what you've been doing in Afghanistan. I thought your mission was over when the Taliban returned. I'm even happier to hear that it's not. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.